Well, thank you all for being here today. We're here to talk about using a common career language, specifically the RIASEC or the Holland themes as a topic of a common career language. We have experts in the room. We're going to go around the horn and get some perspective on this. But first, let's start with Ed Hidalgo. Ed, can you tell us a little bit about this idea of using the RIASEC as common career language with kids and help us picture what we're talking about?
And what a gift it is, Steve, really to be able to step into any classroom, any grade, any child across time zones and states with very simple tools. And what has always surprised me is that young people can really experience this language very personally when we invite them into a form of guided self-assessment, if you will. And whether it's using a poster like you see here over my left shoulder, or we're using simple career cards, students are able to learn the language in about 31 minutes or less. And then they're able to use that language within instructional practices, within conversations. So in so many ways, it's not just about learning the language of RIASEC, but it's about the conversations that we have. And so what's exceptionally surprising is that that same day, that same afternoon, I can step into another classroom after a teacher has watched this work and see that students are asking the teacher, how can we use the RIASEC to map or to find out what are Galileo's letters? And the teacher's actually having this conversation with the students, not a week or a month later, but the same day. At the end of that same class, after 31 minutes, teachers are now using the language of RIASEC to map characters. For example, from a story, The Isle of the Blue Dolphin, or the characters from Charlotte's Web. What are the letters that Charlotte might claim, class? So I think what's been most surprising is the ability to step into any classroom across mostly any grade levels, establish a common language, whether through colors or through words, using a poster, using simple cards, simple methods, that students will respond. They see themselves, they begin to see world. And then most importantly, teachers are able to use the same language to drive back into core content areas like character analysis.
Ed, thank you for painting that picture. Emily, you have deep expertise in the Holland themes, the framework itself of RIASEC. Tell us more about why it serves as a common framework or as a common language. What are some of the attributes or what are some of the elements of RIASEC as a useful tool?
Absolutely. Like you said, I've been studying RIASEC and the Holland framework for a long time. And traditionally, I see that used as a framework laid upon existing knowledge, right? So like the graduating high school student or the graduating college student or the adult changing their career path, that we try to help them use the system that helps to organize our interests, organize the environments that we may operate in, like work. And we try to overlay that onto knowledge they already have, right? And help them make sense of that. Using it as a way to have conversations with kids is setting up a system to organize information as it comes in. And I think that's amazing. So as they start to learn more about themselves, as they start to learn more about the world and the environments they enjoy, do not enjoy, they can start to plug it in to this RIASEC system and start to make sense of themselves and the world as they go. So when they get to that point of, down the road needing to make a decision, they have their information organized. Now, that's such a gift that most people do not have. Most people come into the process of making a complex career decision feeling like the information they have about themselves and jobs are so random and disconnected. And if you can start from the beginning knowing that this kind of information can be organized and understood through the way we talk with one another, it changes the whole process and sets you up for success in a way that most people just have not had access to in the past. So that's how I think that common language and being able to talk to others also using that same language has some power in moving people forward in understanding themselves and everything that's around them.
That's so useful to think about the utility. But Dave, you may not have been a big fan of the RIASEC when we first started talking with you and exploring your thinking. What are your thoughts about this concept of RIASEC as common career language? How do you react to that?
Well, the very reason I'm part of this is because on the road to Damascus, I was in a talk that you folks were giving, and I read all sorts of tweets, particularly by Ed for the last few years, and wondering why this was so exciting. And I have not been a fan of RIASEC, but it's more, I have not been a fan of how RIASEC has been used, which is to label people, to fix them as a certain type, and then to match them as if the economy isn't changing either, and the world of work isn't changing. And it just seems so static. But as soon as I heard how, it was being used here, well, it's a completely different movie. And now it is about common language. And this idea that we have something that kids can understand, employers can understand, teachers can understand, that's relatively value-free. Investigative isn't better than realistic, which isn't better than conventional. We don't need to get into arguments about that sort of thing. And as Emily said, this idea of having a framework where information can get organized as it's coming in is fantastic, because that is a huge piece of what's been missing in, some of the work I've been trying to do and others have been trying to do to integrate career development fully into education. It's been too complicated. It's been a bit too sophisticated. It's too nuanced. And this gets to all the nuance and complications, but it starts with this lovely model that people can talk about, language that everybody understands. And under the assumption, which I fully, totally endorse, that career development is not a problem. We don't have to bolt on career development to schools because there's a problem going on. Career development is just normal, natural, appropriate part of being a human. And it should be a normal, natural, appropriate part of teachers' conversations with students, students' conversations with each other, students' conversations with the curriculum, vice versa. Like, how all that just comes together nicely when we have the ability to talk to each other about this and ask each other some interesting questions. And so that's kind of where my conversion to RIASEC happened, was this notion that, no, we don't have to lock kids into it. Kids can use it. They're operating on it, like they operate on mathematics. It's not defining them. It's fantastic.
So, Michael, the utility, if you will, of RIASEC is kind of on the table, the usefulness of it as a tool. What are some of the other things we should be thinking about when it comes to career conversations? Clearly, this is bigger than just getting a job. What are some bigger concepts that we might need to be thinking about in these conversations?
Yeah, well, Ed did a nice job describing what it's like to be in the classroom and seeing the kids engaged with this process. And he talked about it as being guided self-assessment, which really it is. And so guided self-assessment properly is career intervention. And I think that the thing I want to say is that career concerns are probably, they're among the most worrisome concerns that individuals face. And if we can help people to start to think about and to cope with career concerns, then we're doing something that supports their well-being. That's clearly evident that that's what's happening. And so there's all these mental health markers that come out of career intervention, like meaning and purpose, satisfaction, a sense of contribution, a sense of agency over what you're going to do with your life. And all of those markers come out. And if we do this well, and if we engage kids, we see all these markers of well-being that are improving. And if they're engaged well and they're thinking about their career path, we also see there's academic markers as well. And usually they do better in school as well as a result of being engaged and thinking about their future.
Beautiful. Christina, this all sounds great, but how do you measure impact? What kind of outputs can we tangibly point to with this kind of methodology?
Well, like anything in the social world, it's very important that we understand that we can never look at it as a causation kind of relationship. But so we've tried to find out whether this really was having an impact on how students develop in relation to their career journeys or educational journeys in relation to their career interests. We have done measure of that in looking at behaviors, but also we started looking at whether career conversations using RIASEC would have an impact on how they feel about the lesson that they just had. So starting with the first in how career conversations that use RIASEC may relate to student behaviors, we've surveyed and interviewed students in different contexts. We particularly looked at contexts in Pennsylvania and Orange County, and we had a sample of over 3,000 students from across both places. And we looked at some trends that were coming from multivariate regression, precisely to make sure that we are trying to control for as many variables as possible. That were independent of the context, which was both surprising and informative for where to go next. And it was clear that when career conversations were happening, students wanted more career conversations, but also when they were happening, they were reflecting more. And if they were reflecting more, their well-being was increased. So that was interesting on itself. But what was happening as well was that those students who were reflecting more were also more curious about careers in the world, and they were taking more action on their own to learn more about those careers. They were taking action by experiencing, by going and learning about those careers, but also by having conversations with other people outside of school, other adults that could be of influence to them. And in the interviews, we clarified some of these trends as to why that was happening. And it was clear that students who were talking about these career conversations were saying that they were having more career conversations also at home, with friends, with pets we had from some elementary school students. They were very engaged with the process because they were saying, now I understand things about myself that I couldn't understand before. And I'm very curious about what else can I learn that can relate to my strengths, they would say. So they were very curious about careers that would relate to that, but they were also very comfortable and flexible with the possibility of changing the way the strengths that they identified now, and to changing the careers of interest they had now. So that was another outcome that came through the interviews that we didn't necessarily measure in the surveys. Now, more recently, we were looking at whether we could see or measure in an easy way, not as complicated as multivariate regression and multi-statement kind of variable. We wanted to just simply ask students how they enjoyed the lesson, one lesson where they would have had a career conversation compared to others. And it was quite striking that 84% of students in a sample of 110 in two elementary schools said they enjoyed it more than in other lessons. So we are starting to want to have a more of an idea of whether really this is a genuine engagement and not just the correlation that we see from having students more curious. But the reflection piece just comes to inform us that the RIASEC becomes a switch to career development behaviors. It's not the end all. It's just the start of these behaviors and the feeling capable of doing other things that really equips them to doing more.
Well, thank you all for your expertise. Thank you all for your commitment to the work, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. The simple idea, a common career language drives career conversations, and career conversations lead to action, lead to reflection, and indicators of well-being. So keep those career conversations going, and thanks for listening.